And welcome back. Our next session is a conversation between Pooran Desai of Oneplanet and Daniel Christian Wahl. Pooran has a background in medical sciences and neuroscience, but has dedicated his working career to the design of sustainability strategies for places, products, and services. He led on the creation and implementation of Bioregional's One Planet Living framework, used in over 30 countries and from which the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are derived. Pooran is now focusing on the role of digital technology to help people visualize and manage interconnectedness, founding the technology company Oneplanet.com. Now, Oneplanet's mission is to develop software solutions that enable every organization and business to create visually stimulating, user-friendly, and engaging sustainability plans that are shareable, transparent, and understandable. Pooran will be speaking with the author of Designing Regenerative Cultures, Daniel Christian Wahl. The winner of the 2021 RSA Bicentennial. Let's try that again. Let's go from that one. Here we go. I want to make sure this intro is good. The winner of the 2021 RSA Bicentenary Medal for Applying Design in Service to Society, Christian works as a consultant, educator, and activist with NGOs, businesses, and governments. With degrees in biology and holistic science and a PhD in design for human and planetary health, his work has influenced the emerging fields of regenerative design and I love this word. Let's take our time with this word. I'm trying to read it off the auto cue. Salutogenic design. Wow, I feel that we need to know exactly what that is. Pooran and Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction there. Daniel, I think we've known each other for at least 20 years. So it's been a long time. Is that right?
Yeah, wonderful to have this opportunity to talk with you. I remember in 2001, I was studying holistic science at Schumacher College, and I read you and Sue's book on bioregional development, and it really influenced me greatly. So this is a great pleasure, and I put the map of the world's watersheds behind me to honor our bioregional meeting point.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. So I actually believe you to be the best communicator in the space of regenerative design. And I don't say that lightly. Your book, Designing Regenerative Cultures, I think is a seminal work. I love your posts on LinkedIn, so I recommend anyone who's listening in, start following Daniel, because they're little nuggets of absolute wisdom, and it goes very deep. And I think we'll be able to explore the depth of some of the, of the paradigm shift we need in order for us to have a chance of getting out of a very difficult situation. So hopefully we'll have time to go into that in more detail in this conversation. But I think it's also fantastic that you're now being recognized. For example, winning the RSA Bicentenary Medal last year. So it's great that the Royal Society for Arts is recognizing you as an absolute leader in this space as well. So it's a real privilege for me. I'm a trustee of the Design Council now as well, to really give you an opportunity to share some of your wisdom and experience and practical knowledge as well. So just very briefly, you are based in based on Mallorca, is it? Is that right? Which is the island you're based on? Can you just say a little bit about what you're doing on the island, and then we'll come on to the main part of the conversation.
Well, because of my interest in bioregional scale of design, how the bioregional scale allows us to think locally and globally at the same time, and reintegrate processes of production and consumption at a scale where we might actually fit them into nature's regenerative processes. I moved to Mallorca 12 years ago because one of the problems of bioregionalism is how do we define where the bioregion starts and where it ends. And when you move to an island, you kind of sidestep that issue, because when your feet get wet, you're off the bioregion. But even that's not quite true, because the sea is part of the bioregion.
Yeah, fantastic. And you're doing all sorts of things like planting orchards there as well. So, we are both, well, we've been involved in looking at environmental problems, challenges for 2-3 decades. But really, the last couple of years have been really terrifying in terms of the extreme weather events we've been seeing all around the world. The United Nations and scientists tell us we need to stay under 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise. But actually 96% of climate scientists do not think we're going to stay under 1.5 degrees. We're at 1.2 already, and carbon emissions are still rising. So it's an absolutely massive challenge for us to turn round our society to something different. How do you think the design industry can start grappling with this challenge? How might they start thinking and addressing this issue?
Well, for one thing, of course, I would be biased. Love the idea that the UK Design Council has started this Design for Planet theme, because it takes us a little bit out of this myopic, carbon-focused climate change conversation. I encourage everybody to look up Bridget Mackenzie's from the UK Climate Museum graphic about carbon tunnel vision. Because if we end up just looking at climate change and see that as the great problem that then designers as problem solvers need to respond to, I think we're missing the point. Climate change is a symptom of an underlying, much more complex problem, which is about the narrative we have as human beings with regard to our relationship to nature. We and the design industry included, still continue to create a meta design, a mental scaffolding through the language we use that others nature and culture into two different categories, that somehow suggests that humanity and technology have outlived their membership of the natural community, which is of course completely ludicrous. You and I are walking ecosystems. The cells in our body are more non-human than human and are constantly regenerating themselves. So how do we fit through design humanity back into life's ancient regenerative patterns? Evolution runs on this, what Janine Benyus, the founder of the Biomimicry Institute, so beautifully summarized as life creates conditions conducive to life. So how do we create designs that create conditions conducive to life? And in this context of how late is it? I find it fascinating that the two of us get to talk about this, because if we had 20 years ago followed the patterns that you and Sue and the Bioregional group were suggesting with the mini mills and the regional charcoal industry, the re-regionalization of production and consumption, the relocalization of city meeting needs through the BedZ project and so on. The conversation about Oneplanet living, you were miles ahead of the mainstream, and had we listened at that point, and maybe I could say, had we also entertained the notion of design for human and planetary health when I wrote my PhD in 2006, the window of opportunity was still wide open. Now I feel the window of opportunity is closing very, very fast, and we need to not just try to pretend we can squeeze through it, but we need to accept that there will be a series of cascading collapses coming at us, and that runaway climate change will be part of the future. And it will take time, like cathedral building design, to rebalance systems so we might have a slim chance to avoid the worst of cascading climate change.
Yeah, it's sobering, isn't it, Daniel, the situation we find ourselves in, and I think most people are not aware or choosing to ignore the seriousness of our situation. So much so that, of course, the UN Secretary General is now talking, about it being life and death, I don't know what else he could say to convey how urgent the situation is. But it's a very interesting point about we are still trying to solve things in silos. And absolutely, I completely agree with you, trying to solve carbon in a silo without looking at its impacts on wider environmental issues, of course, resource use, impacts on soils, impacts on our own health, our ability for communities to thrive, our mental health. And this reductionism, for me, and I think for you as well, is at the heart of the problem and the paradigm shift, the problem that we face and the paradigm shift we need. And really, over the last 300 years, we have become more and more reductionist. And so, for example, when we've applied reductionist science and technology to agriculture, for example, after the Second World War, we focused on increasing yield. And yes, we increased yield, but we did that by destroying 50% of the soils. We did it by creating pesticides, which have contributed to the insect apocalypse. We've used fertilizers, which release huge amounts of carbon, but also they have polluted our rivers and created dead zones in the oceans. So being really focused actually doesn't enable us to see the big picture. And we have that in medical practice as well, with my background in medical sciences, where doctors are saying we got it completely wrong. That actually up to 80% of NHS spending could be avoided. Our current medical approach to health is to treat diseases in silos rather than promoting health. And if we promote health, then actually a lot of the diseases don't even appear. So this reductionism, I mean, how core do you think that is to the paradigm shift that we need, and how can designers start understanding where they're being maybe reductionist, and maybe what is the paradigm that they need to start thinking in?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I first found out about your work while I was studying holistic science at Schumacher College. And then I went on to Dundee University to do a PhD that was entitled Design for Human and Planetary Health, a Holistic Integral Approach to Complexity and Sustainability. Nice and academic title. And in that, I built a 750-page PhD, 300,000 word framework that was suggesting that we need something that I called scale linking design, that understood that health is an emergent property of a complex dynamic system that manifests from planetary scale all the way down to the individual, an organ, or a cell. And that to create positive interventions for positive health in a system, you actually have to design for health on all those scales because they interact. It was a great gratification when maybe 7 or 8 years after my PhD came out, the Rockefeller Foundation and the Lancet launched the Planetary Health Commission. And then a few years later, the Planetary Health Alliance was formed, which is basically health policy people talking about the need that if we want to respond to this avalanche of costs in health systems everywhere, we need to understand that human and ecosystems health and planetary health are fundamentally linked. And that was also the argument in my PhD. And my suggestion was that designers need to be health practitioners, but not health practitioners in the way the current defunct allopathic NHS system operates, which is, again, reductionist and almost treating humans like a machine. And as they get more and more pressed, it's just protocols of treatment, and the human isn't seen by the system anymore. And we need to also, in this re-pivot of design towards supporting human and planetary health, understand a notion that was developed by a health scientist in the 1960s in Israel called Aaron Antonovsky, which is salutogenesis, or salutogenic design is what Seaton Baxter and I coined it in the design world. And the idea of a salutogenic rather than a pathogenic approach to health or design is that it's not about the system falling out of a perfect state and then a design intervention or a health intervention putting it back into that state, fighting symptoms, but it's about building the capacity of the system, the human being or the community or the bioregion, to respond to what will come at it. We will always have stresses affect our health, and we have to integrate these stresses into our system and let them build our immunity. So every time we have an illness, our body learns something new and then responds to new illnesses or other illnesses differently in the future. So it's more about building the capacity to journey into an uncertain future rather than maintaining a perfect state. And that's also where the link to regenerative design is, because the shift of working on regeneration is away from outcome thinking and solution thinking. It's not built on a process where you have a problem and then designers as problem solvers come together in a hackathon or a design sprint with some technologies and hothouse solutions to that problem. Because in that process, what you're doing is you're abstracting more and more. You're trying to define the problem, even if you try to do so holistically, from lots of different angles. But in the process, it gets more and more abstract. Then a solution is designed, and then the economists come into the room and say, how do we scale up this solution? Let's roll it out globally. And then we force so-called solutions onto specific places and specific people and specific cultures, and they don't fit. And we're surprised that lots of side effects happen. So regenerative design flips this around and says, no, we need to design from the potential of people in place. In the UK, Patrick Geddes, over 100 years ago, understood this as a biologist who became father of town planning and influenced sociology and was really a design thinker, that it's only when we reduce the complexity of the wicked design problem to the specificity of a unique region with unique people, unique companies, and a unique ecosystem, that suddenly this cluster of problems that we will never solve because they're wicked problems turns into wicked potential. And we can learn to help build the capacity of a bioregion as a living organism to respond to the disruptions that will come at us. Like you and I might be wrong, and we might be lucky, and climate change might not hit us as hard as we currently think. And unlikely, but it's actually going to be a cascade of economic collapses, supply chain collapses, political disruptions, including war. I mean, we've lived this acceleration in the last few years of how business as usual and the world we knew in 2019 isn't the same world anymore. And so one of the key roles here is, in terms of salutogenic design, is to focus on capacity building through design. So if a client comes along and says, we want this, to think about how do I rejig this design brief to make the process of designing and the implementation of design a process of learning for the individual, the collective, the design team, the community in which the design is implemented, and everybody who will be touched by it, either through the supply chain that made the design possible or through the use of the design. And so we hold our solutions more lightly as prototypes that allow our continuous learning of how to create true place-sourced designs. And there's a huge opportunity here for designers to help in this process of economic diversification in each bioregion through design and through the creation of new enterprises that look at, can we meet the needs of the local population to an increased degree through local production or regional production for regional consumption? And how do we tease apart the circular economy question of what we can cycle as local as possible where it's most effective, and what global connections we need to enable this bioregionalization of our civilization. And that's really what regenerative cultures for me is, these cultures in place living the question of how do we become custodians of this place again? How do we fall in love with this place again? How do we become not just owners of this place or no more owners of this place, but expressions of this place that help this place to move into abundance? And the last thing I want to say there is, let's not understand regenerative cultures as a utopia yet to be designed that has never happened before and that might not happen because it's too late and all that. Let's understand that we have it in ourselves to be regenerative, and that in the history of humanity, we would not be here if our ancestors pre-agricultural revolution would not have been custodians and expressions of the ecosystems they inhabited. And there's now lots of evidence coming out that even the Amazon rainforest is a human and community of life co-creation in that place. Lila June just published a PhD a couple of weeks ago looking at North American land management practices and how over 3,000 years, certain ecosystems have been made more productive by the native inhabitants of these ecosystems. So we also need to pick up that wisdom that we left aside in the quest for science and technology, and understand that we need to cherish this indigenous wisdom and bring it into the modern age through a bioregional redesign of the human impact on Earth.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And I think those are concepts which are quite difficult for us to understand, given our educational, most of us, our culture, current modern, I'm going to say Western culture at the moment. These sorts of concepts can be quite difficult to design. I'm just going to ask viewers to take time to really understand what you are saying, because it's a very different way of looking at the world. So for me, because I come from a reductionist scientific background, and I always say it's taken me 35 years to unlearn that way of thinking in order to see the world in a very different way. I mean, for me now, I say to people, look, if you're designing something, always think about, is it going to have a positive impact on health of people? Is it going to have a positive impact on health of the community and on health of the planet? And to think in that way in order for us to have solutions which are holistic, and that holism isn't a wet and woolly way of viewing the world. It is actually a very, very powerful and essential part of how we need to view the world. Would you add anything to that? Am I, getting what you're saying right? Is there something you would like to clarify or add there?
I mean, that's a friend of mine calls it triethicity. How does it serve the individual? How does it serve the community? How does it serve life as a planetary process? Yeah. That is exactly what I was pointing towards when I mentioned indigenous cultures. Wherever you go on the planet, the indigenous land custodians of the last remaining biodiversity hotspots on the planet that keep the resilience of life as a planetary process alive to the point that we might still have a future, all agree on the fact that every important decision needs to be based on that triethicity. And so you summed it up beautifully. Like if a designer asked those three questions every time in every context, we're already moving in the right direction. And the other thing that I would maybe add is to pay attention to what I mentioned earlier, that as designers, we're very object focused in our thinking. We're used to getting a design brief and then a deliverable that is the outcome, which is very often a process or an object or a way of doing things, but it's not really foregrounding how the process of creating the design builds capacity for people in place, for individuals in the team, for everybody, to keep designing in a more appropriate way, which includes the capacity to question the design and the outcome we've created, to say, this design now no longer serves, because that's the dead end we're currently stuck in. Tony Fry, the design philosopher, says design goes on designing, and we're not paying enough attention to how we're stuck in designs that no longer serve, and how we need to redesign patterns so we fit back in. And so let's not be too object focused, but focus on the process where design becomes the platform of conversation in which we can live the questions of how we become local to this place again, fall in love with this place again, and celebrate this place and heal it. And through that, bioregion by bioregion, begin to heal the planet and our relationship with life.
Okay, fantastic. I think I love how you say it's it's about unlocking all this potential from wicked problems to wicked potential, and I think that's where the hope for me really lies, is that there's huge amounts of human potential if we can unlock it in the right way, aligned towards regenerating the planet. And for me as well, we still got some of this. I would say a bit of a problem in our language, even to the extent of design for planet. It's still separating us from the planet. Perhaps it should be, I think we've both said this, it should be design as planet, that we should actually be seeing ourselves as part of a living organism, which is bigger than us. And of course that we are an ecosystem, as you said, of lots of organisms. The idea of an individual is just a view of the world at one scale. If we go smaller, we see ourselves as ecosystems. If we go larger, we see ourselves as part of a living planet. So I think that's part of this paradigm shift that we need. We're coming towards the end of our discussion here, Daniel. So
let me add briefly to that, because another dimension of this design thesis that I mentioned earlier, from by now 15, 16 years ago, is this notion of meta design, where I picked up on the work of John Wood at Goldsmith. And it's highly important to understand that upstream in the design process are precisely the language, like what you were just pointing to. If we say design for planet, then planet is something else and nature is some other. Even if we learning from nature, from is still out there, but learning to design as nature and design as planet, as life, is a mimetic shift that shifts our way of seeing. And in many ways, the story of my PhD being published in 2006, and in 2022, the Design Council starting, or 21 actually, with the COP25 starting the Design for Planet Festival, is an example of how mimetic shifts or meta design shifts take time to filter into culture. And I'm just really excited that we've arrived at Design for Planet, and it's a moving target. We will learn how to design as life as we continue this conversation.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And Daniel, in the last minute and a half, what are the three things you would like our viewers to go away with after this conversation?
Well, I think that question that we've already spoken to is an easy takeaway. How does the design I'm practicing serve the health of myself, my community, and the planet? How can I make it a process of capacity building that allows myself, my community, and my planet to meet an uncertain future? Because complex dynamic systems, the ones that we participate in, are fundamentally unpredictable and controllable. So the whole solutioneering, enforcing, and managing the system is an illusion. We need to first meet that reality and then realize that today's solutions become tomorrow's problems. So we need to be more flexible about the outcomes we design and keep learning.
Absolutely fantastic, Daniel. And I love that bit about moving away from managing. So maybe it's away from managing to nurturing. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. And I would recommend anyone watching this, get a copy of Designing Regenerative Cultures, and definitely follow Daniel on LinkedIn. And I always look forward to your latest posts. So thank you very much, Daniel, and I hope everyone has enjoyed hearing our conversation today.
Thank you so much, both to you and the Design Council. Wonderful.
Okay, goodbye.